The breed history on the streets begins in the year 1969 in the North Lawndale neighborhood at the intersection of 19th to 16th and Kitsy right near Douglas Park. The original gang was called the Goon Squad or Goon Squad Gangsters. It is possible the founder was named Rab. This was a group of rather violent and crazy youths that were quick with the trigger. They had violent gang wars with the vice lords, especially traveling vice lords, and were recognized by police as far back as 1969 and even made the newspaper a few times dating back to 1969. The Goons made the newspaper 3 times beginning in 1969, again in 1970, and finally in 1972. All 3 times the Goons were involved in violent crimes. Boony was not part of this gang despite what many believe. He was a 31-year-old man and in prison at the time and would not be the leader of teenagers shooting and stabbing rivals in the streets while making the newspaper. The Goons get lots of credit though because they were starting during a time when North Lawndale was untouchable for new gangs to form because the vice lords and Egyptian cobras ruled that whole neighborhood with an iron fist. The vice lords alone ran it from Pulaski to Douglas Park, but the Goons dared to challenge them. The Goons were perhaps more violent than the vice lords, which would later get them noticed by the black gangsters once their leadership ended up in prison. Goons lived up to their name and would later work as murder for hire just like the black gangsters and Boony. George Boony Black Davis's gang affiliations were not very known, as was shown in the court documents when he was convicted of armed robbery and attempted murder in 1981. The royal family and Boony Black were possibly higher up in the prison system than gang leaders like Larry Hoover and Jeff Fort. It is possible leadership of the major gangs paid taxes to Boony and the rest of the Black Gangsters syndicate. I am not positive on when the term Black Gangsters came to be, but it was for sure used by the time all these men became incarcerated in 1981. Both Boony and Cochise had strong connections with the Italian Mafia. They were incarcerated in Stateville and Menard Correctional Facility, which was a big incarceration place of Italian Mafia wise guys. The Black Gangsters were top tier because of this connection and were the alphas of the prison system. These guys never got caught for hundreds of possible homicides and, like the royal family, they did not like witnesses and often killed them. There was even situations where they would cut the heads off victims and put their heads in their laps to send a message. I will touch a lot more on the royal family in its own chapter, because there's a lot to tell and so many legends to speak on, like the Godfather many referred to as Jeepers. The Bee Gees originated when a group under the leadership of George Boony Black Davis broke away from the Black Gangster disciples along with Davis. Other founders of the gang included Samuel King Ram Lawrence and Maurice King Baldy Jackson. Other leaders would include Cochise, Gam, and Jeepers. After the splinter, the Bee Gees immediately became entangled in a long-standing war with the BGDs. In fact, the only assassination attempt against Hoover since he has been incarcerated was perpetrated by BG leadership. Larry Hoover was stabbed several times, but was saved by Milwaukee King leader King Shaky. Larry then had Boony stabbed 27 times, but both men survived. This is also the coming together of the royal family Goon Squad Gangsters and Black Gangsters to create the BGN or Black Gangster Nation. Boony would retain his control of the prison system, as he always did, but now he was in charge of the Black Gangsters as an organization. The Abla public housing projects were designated to the Black Gangsters, and this was the beginning of the Black Gangsters' new breed's direct history. In the early 1980s, the Bee Gees, known then during the political mob era as Better Guidance, developed a voter registration organization called the Concerned Youth Association. The CYA was intended to give the illusion that the gang had legitimate interests in politics and thus draw attention away from their criminal enterprise. However, it dissolved shortly after its inception with little fanfare. Throughout the 1980s, the Bee Gees expanded their base of operations from the Abla Housing Project complex on the city's near west side to the K-Town area of the city's west side. During this expansion, their principal adversaries were the Gangster Disciples, Vice Lords, and Black Souls. The Black Souls were brazen enough to put a hit on Davis the Don while he was serving a sentence in Stateville Correctional Center in 1987. The hit was actually orchestrated by a former high-ranking BG who had recently flipped Black Soul. This occurred in 1987. After the hit attempt, in which another BG lost his life, the BGs asked the BGDs to assist them, however, they did not. This apparently angered the BGs, who dropped out of the Folks Alliance altogether. They also dropped the six-pointed star from their insignia and adopted the 3 L's from it: love, life, and loyalty. 1981 was the time when folks and people were becoming official on the streets and in prison. What angered Boony the most when he arrived in 1981 was that his black gangsters were aligning with the folks and incorporating with the black gangster disciple nation. This is how folks ends up interwoven within the BGN, but this was not authorized or official with Boony and never was. In the 1980s, members of the streets very often claimed folks, but this was never official by the main leadership. Therefore, the breeds technically were never folks or peoples. There was a war within the BGN on the west side in the 1980s, and this was the early development of the new breeds, and this is perhaps how folk concepts were brought in for a time, as the group against the original BGN likely claimed folks on the streets, but once in prison there was no rebellion in the 80s. There were 3 main factions the BGs had in the city. One of them was ran by George Davis, who had the Abla projects in the Robert Brooks Homes row houses, Grace Abbott Homes, and Loomis Courts. He also had the 16th Street BGs, who were in North Lawndale, which represented the original Goon squad birthing place by 16th to 19th, and Kidsey, which would spread to 13th. The rivalry with traveling vice lords would continue in all territories ran by Boony. Roger Collins ran the Harold Ikes projects and the 29th Street project buildings in the Dearborn Homes projects at 29th and Federal area, possibly in the 2901 and 2931 buildings. This group was known as Black Goon Squad Gangsters, as they were described as in 1984 newspapers, as they went to war with El Rookins over drug turf. The third chapter was the Pocket Town chapter in the Greater Grand Crossing community at 71st to 75th, South Chicago Avenue to Kimbark. This deck was run by Samuel King Ram Lawrence. These were the original decks of the Black Gangsters established in 1981, and these men were some of the original L's of the Trey L or Triple L aspect of the organization. There were also Black Goon Squad Gangsters in the Ida B. Wells projects and Phillips High School in the 1980s. They followed the BGN. After the Black Gangsters formed in 1981, they made a conquest to the suburb of Zion, Illinois, and in the south suburb of Harvey. However, their presence was not necessarily territorial, but instead for business reasons. The leadership of this new organization knew how to make money on the streets and aggressively pursued drug turf while violently wiping out competition. The old ways of the 1970s Royal Family and Goon Squad were installed in young members living in the village in the 1980s. Many of these young men were already from some of the roughest and rawest breed of killers and naturally fit in with the Black Gangsters. The way of this organization was to not let anything stop them, especially the traveling vice lords. In the year 1992, a younger group of Black Gangsters broke away and called themselves New Breeds or Triple L Breeds. This group was not connected with People or Folk Alliance. These young bloods were even more aggressive than the Boony Black-led Black Gangsters, as they moved into new territory at 16th and Costner in the North Lawndale neighborhood, where they cliqued up with Black Souls. The breeds also opened up in West Garfield Park and clicked up with the Black Souls in that community as they battled several vice lord factions. The BGs are an extremely strict organization, and it is not uncommon for the gang to issue a death violation. In West Garfield Park, the breeds even flipped gangster disciples out of their original West Side set. The breeds stormed the Austin neighborhood in 1992 and the East Garfield Park neighborhood, claiming the area known as Fifth City. The breeds even opened territory in the West Humboldt Park community as they battled with conservative vice lords and Latin kings in 1992. The breeds also spread deeper onto the south side as they opened in the West Englewood neighborhood, Roseland, South Shore, and the suburbs of Rockford, Maywood, and Bellwood. Breeds also opened a big section in the city of New Orleans in Louisiana, as well as St. Louis, Missouri. In the year 1997, George Davis was let out of prison, and when he returned to the streets, the fear and respect young breeds felt returned. Davis now offered to combine forces, making the Black Gangster New Breeds official. Breeds and Black Disciples became very close in relationship as they both were heavily at war with Gangster Disciples. Both Breeds and BDs established the Trays Both Ways Alliance, as three fingers could symbolize both gangs, the LLL for Breeds and the Gates for BDs. The Breeds have grown to over 6,000 plus members over the years and are known to be very quick to use their guns. Many bodies have come up during gang wars between Breeds and their adversaries, and most of the time it is their enemy that ends up dead. It is known that the Breeds wiped out the traveling vice lords in the village. The Breeds became the largest gang in the Abla projects as they viciously battled vice lord factions in those projects until the majority of them were torn down. When most of the village was torn down, the vice lords were out of the Abla homes, but the Breeds outlived everyone else and remain in these renovated buildings. The Breeds were founded by Black organized crime members that had heavy ties to the Italian Chicago outfit. Breeds were born out of men that were cold-blooded killers that would very easily take a life without blinking. Cochise first connected with the Italian outfit in 1971 and later became a co-founder of this organization. Boony Black was another co-founder that was a hardened gangster that had no fear and was known to be a serious gangster. It was even rumored that he shut down the Italian outfit at one point in time. Boony's connection to the outfit even outdates any part of Breed history and Cochise's connections to the outfit. Boony dressed well and like an old-time gangster. Boony led an extortion operation and most of his customers scrambled to pay him as quickly as possible. Boony was tall with big wide eyes and had a handlebar mustache, making him look ferocious. Not only that, his record of violent crime proved he could be dangerous if crossed. I don't know if Boony was born in Chicago or if he moved alongside African American migration from the southern states like other big-time gang leaders like Larry Hoover or Jeff Fort. The only birthing info I have is that he was born on May 23, 1938, making him much older than Larry Hoover, Jeff Fort, and even older than Pepilo Perry, the founder of the Vice Lords. Boony outages all the other gang leaders, and I have only heard about notorious older gang leaders from groups like the Latin Kings, but among African American gangs Boony is the oldest among them. By the time the late 1950s came around, which was the birthing time of the Gangster Disciples, Black Disciples, Vice Lords, Mickey Cobras, and Black P. Stones, Boony was already in his 20s in age and was older and more connected to organized crime than the younger gang leaders that were just starting out in the late 50s. It is said that Boony was over Larry Hoover and perhaps was even a shot caller on the streets and in prison. However, Boony certainly would let Larry Hoover take the spotlight. Any organized gangster would do the same. The less attention, the better for business. In the September 15, 2009, issue of Az's magazine, author Mark Brown stated in the article that Boony was gangbanging for 40 years. The Breed's history as an organization would have begun 40 years ago from 2009, but I highly doubt that is Boony's personal story. Before and up to the 2000s decade, Boony was connected in a way to the Chicago outfit and did murder for hire and had various other connections with the Italian mob, with extortion and even drug trafficking. This further makes me believe a little more in the rumor that he had Italian blood in him, or at least relatives with Italian blood, which would have brought him closer to the mob. I have never learned about any African American Chicago gangster as connected to the mob as Boony Black. Other leaders like Wayne Jack Bobo Edwards of the Black Souls and some of the Black P. Stones leaders had connections, but those seemed like only business connections. But with Boony it seems a little more of a personal connection, but then again there is much about him that I do not know. Davis was what is known as a goon, which tends to refer to someone that will inflict pain or kill for money. Davis was large-sized, so he was ideal for the job of cracking skulls for money. According to Az's magazine on their September 15, 2009 issue, in an exclusive interview with Boony Black himself, he described himself as highly successful at collecting debts, and not even one of them told him no. He described that he had a look about him that made people give up the location of their stash. He didn't know why they looked at him and gave it up, but many times that's all it took. When looking at pictures of him, you can see it in his eyes as a man that doesn't play around and will get what he needs at all costs. In the magazine, he described a method of torturing drug dealers by taking 2 butcher knives and putting them over a high flame on the stove until they were red hot. He would then give them a chance to talk, and if there was any hesitation, he would put the scalding knives on their neck. Boony was also a barn boss in Cook County Jail. Barn bosses were dominant over other inmates and were often the more violent alpha inmates that kept other inmates in line, using deadly force if necessary. Barn bosses many times even have more control over the jails than prison staff, resulting in corrections officers having to work with barn bosses for mutual control of the jail. Barn bosses had many henchmen under their control and had access to many homemade weapons. The barn boss system was set up in 1968 to control the inmates in exchange for power bestowed upon by the correctional staff. Boony was one that was chosen, which is prior to when gang leaders of big gangs started coming to prison. The only main gang leader locked up by then was Eugene Hairston of the Black Pea Stones, so Boony was a barn boss before the big players arrived. A strong connection to the Chicago outfit, combined with being elected a barn boss, made Boony of utmost power in the prison system. Barn bosses could kill, mutilate, tax, move about the sections of prison, and had the keys to all parts of the prison. The only key they lacked was a key outside of prison. This was deemed necessary by the prison staff because the prisons were out of control with violent inmates. Boony was an alpha above those killers and psychopaths and would bring these killers to their knees. As you can see, the power of Boony and his henchmen, the Black Gangsters, was growing before the 70s even got here and before the Goon squads and Royal Family even started. George Boony Black Davis was considered the last Don and the last of a dying breed. He was heavily honored, and when he died in 2009 at the age of 71, almost every member of the new breed showed up to pay respect.